Congolese Monsignor Emery Kabongo was working at the Vatican Secretariat of State when he got a call from John Paul II.
My first memory of John Paul II was when he appointed me as his personal secretary so that I could help his first secretary, Stanislaw Dziwisz. I didn't write a letter or ask for an appointment. That's why I thank him for his Catholic mentality and for thinking that an African would be a good secretary.
From 1982 to 1987, he traveled alongside the Pope in all his international trips. In fact, he says there's one trip in particular that he will always remember.
During his trip to Colombia, I got sick, and I just remember waking up in the bed that had been prepared just in case the Pope didn't feel well. So the doctors took me to that room, and I asked myself, how is it that I'm here? It turns out it was John Paul II who asked them to put me in a safe place so that I could recover, and I stayed there for 2 days.
He says that working for John Paul II was quite demanding but rewarding. The Pope, he says, would always stay close to his collaborators.
He was like a father for me and for the rest of the team. He never yelled or raised his voice at us.
In fact, Monsignor Kabongo is one of the few people who shared their testimony in a book titled Accanto Giovanni Paolo II. It also features an interview with Benedict XVI, talks about his relationship with the future saint. John Paul II's pontificate broke many records, but beyond the numbers, the leadership of the Polish Pope guided the Catholic Church through many rising challenges in modern times.
Non abbiate paura. Solo lui ha parole di vita. Sì, di vita eterna.
And one of the greatest challenges was the Cold War and the two blocs that pitted the world against one another. John Paul II had suffered firsthand from the oppression of the Nazi and communist regimes. His role was fundamental in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. One of his first trips, in fact, was to his native Poland in 1979. It became a defining point that encouraged Poles to fight for freedom. John Paul II was a seasoned traveler who reached all corners of the world. He made 104 international trips and visited 130 countries. In terms of mileage, it's enough to go around the world 30 times. But there were two countries he was unable to visit: China and Russia. John Paul II referred to Jews as older brothers, and he became the first pope to step inside a synagogue. He also prayed before the Wailing Wall. He was also the first pope to kiss the Quran and step inside a mosque. It happened in Damascus, at the site where St. John the Baptist was buried. And as part of this interreligious dialogue, John Paul II was a pioneer in calling for joint prayer in favor of peace, as he did in Assisi. It happened back in 1986. More than 150 delegates from 12 religions took part. And during his pontificate, several major conflicts made international headlines: Rwanda, Kosovo, Sudan, Iraq, and the Balkan Wars. The Pope, who had survived World War II, did not remain silent. He became the voice of humanity, actively advocating against violence.
Fermatevi, fermatevi davanti al bambino.
When it came to proclaiming saints, the Polish Pope looked to modern times. He raised to the altars hundreds of people who led exemplary lives. And for the first time, he jointly beatified a married couple, Luigi and Maria Beltrame. He also took a particular concern for women. He was the first pope to write an apostolic letter directed to them, Mulieris Dignitatem. In it, he urged them to reflect on their personal, cultural, social, and ecclesiastical responsibilities. Weakened by sickness himself, John Paul II remained active until his very last moments. He used his personal experience as a teaching tool for a world already under the influence of the so-called throwaway culture. In the Jubilee year of 2000, John Paul II formally apologized for the past errors of the Church. It was a historic moment which the Pope defined as a purification of memory, which allowed Christians to enter the third millennium more open to God. John Paul II understood that young people needed special attention and guardianship. He came up with a gathering dedicated exclusively to them, World Youth Day. The Pope said he felt like another young person in the crowd. Over the course of his 27-year pontificate, John Paul II overcame many obstacles and reached many goals. But above all else, he was able to reach millions of Christians, talking to them one-on-one from heart to heart.
Thousands of pilgrims filled St. Peter's Square despite cloudy skies and chances for rain. Pope Francis surprised a group of Italians and Argentinians when he stopped his Pope-mobile to greet them. But a greater surprise came when he denounced the situation several Italian workers are going through.
Ieri ho ricevuto un video appello da parte degli operai della Lucchini di Piombino, inviatomi prima dalla chiusura dell'altoforno e che mi ha davvero commosso. Sono rimasto triste.
The Pope asked the workers not to lose hope and told them he was at their side praying for them. But he also directed a message to the people in power who make these types of decisions.
E a tutti i responsabili chiedo di compiere ogni sforzo di creatività e di generosità per riaccendere la speranza nei cuori di questi nostri fratelli e nel cuore di tutte le persone disoccupate a causa dello spreco e della crisi economica. Per favore, aprite gli occhi e non rimanete con le mani incrociate.
In his catechesis, Pope Francis talked about hope. He asked several times if Christians place their hopes on power and money or on the risen Christ.
Fratelli e sorelle, Lui è vivo, è con noi. Non andiamo da tanti sepolcri che oggi ti promettono qualcosa, bellezza, e poi non ti danno niente. Lui è vivo. Non cerchiamo fra i morti colui che è vivo.
The Pope added that Christ brings a deep and authentic joy, but he also admitted that at times it's not easy to accept the presence of the risen among us. During his daily morning mass at Casa Santa Marta, the Pope asked Christians to rejoice because Christ has risen from the dead. Those who don't, he explained, seem to live in a perpetual funeral.
Si muovono meglio non nella luce della gioia, ma nelle ombre, come quegli animali che soltanto riescono a uscire nella notte, ma alla luce del giorno non vedono niente. Come i pipistrelli, E con un po' del senso dell'umorismo possiamo dire che ci sono cristiani pipistrelli che preferiscono le ombre alla luce della presenza del Signore.
He prayed so that Jesus opens the mind of people so that everyone can understand that God is a living person who stays close to his people.
Tu parli con Gesù. Da Giovanni Paolo II, ma mi viene a dire il grande missionario della Chiesa. È un missionario, un uomo che ha portato il Vangelo dappertutto. Voi lo sapete meglio di me, ma lei quanti viaggi ha fatto? Ma lei andava, sentiva questo fuoco di portare avanti la parola del Signore, no? È un Paolo, è un San Paolo, no? È un uomo così, questo che per me è grande. E fare la cerimonia di canonizzazione tutti e due insieme credo che è un messaggio alla Chiesa. Questi due sono bravi, sono due bravi.
It was a unique day, to say the least. The canonization of John Paul II and John XXIII will forever be recorded in the history of the Catholic Church. The setting itself was impressive, from the two giant tapestries of the two new saints hanging from St. Peter's Basilica to the hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, dignitaries, presidents, and leaders who made it a point to attend the ceremony. The Day of Four Popes, as it's now being called, began with the arrival of Benedict XVI. Cardinals greeted him, and then Pope Francis did the same. And then that very Sunday morning, before the Universal Church, the Pope read the decree officially declaring John Paul II and John XXIII as saints.
Beatos Ioannem Vicesimum Tertium et Ioannem Paulum Secundum Sanctos esse decernimus et definimus.
Applause quickly followed in the square, and thousands paid their respects in Rome and throughout the world. Relatives of John XXIII and also the woman who was cured through the intercession of John Paul II carried the relics of the two new saints. In his homily, the Pope explained why they both exemplified God's love and mercy.
Sono stati due uomini coraggiosi, pieni della parresia dello Spirito Santo, e hanno dato testimonianza alla Chiesa e al mondo della bontà di Dio, della sua misericordia.
Even when faced with tragedy and suffering, the Pope explained that the two new saints were brave.
Sono stati sacerdoti e vescovi e papi del XX secolo. Ne hanno conosciuto le tragedie, ma non ne sono stati sopraffatti. Più forte in loro era Dio.
He also highlighted how John Paul II and John XXIII conveyed hope and faith even in dark times. He described John XXIII as a pope who was open to the Spirit, and John Paul II as a leader and protector of the family. In fact, Pope Francis called on them both to intercede in the next synod on the family.
Che entrambi ci insegnino a non scandalizzarsi delle piaghe di Cristo, ad entrarci nel mistero della misericordia divina che sempre spera, sempre perdona, perché sempre ama.
At the end of the Mass, the Pope made his way through the square in the Pope-mobile to greet all the pilgrims. He even stretched out to the neighboring streets going beyond Vatican borders to thank all the people who witnessed this historic day in the church. Pope Francis briefly greeted the Spanish monarchs at the end of the canonization ceremony on Sunday. But on Monday morning, he met with the royal couple for almost an hour. It's been the Pope's longest private audience to date.
Buenos días, Majestad. ¿Cómo está? Los benedictinos dicen Benedictus Benedictus.
Their private audience lasted 53 minutes. They talked about everything from youth unemployment to the conflict in Ukraine. As a gift, they gave Pope Francis an edition of the complete works of Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. In a way, these items were a symbolic invitation for the Pope to visit Spain in 2015 to mark the birth of Saint Teresa. The Pope gave the couple a bas-relief of Bernini's original design of St. Peter's Square, which included a third row of columns. After exchanging gifts, the Pope greeted the Spanish delegation and even joked with the foreign minister. The Pope then walked them out as they left, but he asked that they pass along a message to the rest of the royal family. During their visit to the Vatican, the Spanish king and queen met with the Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin. They gave him a replica of a catechism volume in an indigenous language. King Juan Carlos has met 7 popes. He was baptized by Pius XII, and John XXIII gave him the clearance to marry Sophia from Greece, who was then Orthodox. And then Paul VI welcomed him after his reign began, and they also met John Paul I. The king and John Paul II had a great friendship. He also met 3 times with Benedict XVI during his pontificate. This was the first meeting between the king and Pope Francis.